I could never do what I do here without the automatic water change system. I mean, it just isn't possible. I couldn't imagine taking care of this number of tanks without it. I did, like every hobbyist, I kept up to about 20 tanks without the system before I added it, and because that was kind of like the limit of what I could take maximum care of. And so here's the system that I ended up with, and I'm really happy with it. It's at a point now where it's been working pretty consistently as you see it today for about 16 years. So the bugs have pretty much been worked out, and so the first thing we'll talk about is how it works, what the concept is. The very first system I had was actually pretty simple. This is from a talk I used to give on it, and it was just a single line that went into a tank with a valve on it, and you would open the valve, fill the tank up. When the tank was filled up, you'd close the valve, and then that would hold a siphon from the valve down into the tank. So when it came time again to drain the tank, all you would do is turn the valve and the siphon would start and it would drain back down. So each one of these then was hooked up in series, and it would drain down to a sink, and so then you would just hook it up to the sink to fill the tanks up, and then turn the valves off, and then open the valves to drain everything out into the sink. So it was great. The problem is when you started getting into more than a few tanks, you couldn't fill them all up at the same time. You had to fill them at a few times, a couple at a time. But more importantly, the whole system had to be mounted on the front of the tanks because you're always there to turn the valves to do the water changes. And also, you had to be there when it was being done, the draining and the filling. So though it eliminated any need for carrying buckets and any need for a lot of the work that water changes entail, it still had its compromises. So what I was looking for was something where I could do a full water change, when I wasn't even there. This tank right here is perfect to show the concept because everything is mounted on the front of the tank, whereas throughout the room everything is normally mounted on the back of the tank, so you can't see it. But this is pretty clear, and it shows there's a fill line on the left, and it goes down. It's got a knob that adjusts how much water goes into the tank. You'll see that there's water flowing into it currently as we're taping this. And then the drain system sits here. I had a customer point out to me that Innis had called this an external loop water leveling system, and that's kind of pretty much what it is. The water, there's a siphon that's down in through here, and water stays in through this loop. When the water in the tank raises up above where this breakoff point is, then the water in this loop also raises in level and goes out and goes down to where it then drains into a drain and goes out to the city. There's a hole at the top here that is used so you don't develop a vacuum and that it works well. And that's basically the whole thing. Now, the issue with this is, of course, you're building one of these for each aquarium in the room. Like I say, you can put them behind the tank so you can't see it. But when you end up doing this for a large number of tanks, it can look pretty intimidating. But it's really nothing more than this for each aquarium. Here's a second tank in the room that's also really easy. The fill line's on the left, the drain line is on the right. Throughout most of the room, though, I usually have the fill line with a cap at the end of it with a 16th inch or 8th inch hole drilled in the back of it. That way it's easier to maintain pressure throughout the room because these valves are not real fine of an adjustment, and the cap helps you adjust how much water is going into the tank when you're doing a water change. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and build a drain setup for a single tank. It's very simple to do, not a big deal at all. If you've got a number of tanks going, you're going to want to go ahead and cut a bunch of these pieces and then just go ahead and start putting them together. The first thing you'll probably need, if you don't already own one, is a PVC cutter. This is probably one of the best ones. These run about 12 bucks. They're great for doing it, and definitely saves your wrist and your hand, something you're going to want to have. Some PVC glue. When time comes, when we put this together, I glue all the drain setups. Air will get into them otherwise and cause them to lose their siphon more quickly, plus they'll leak and such, so using glue is a good thing. So to make this drain setup work, we have to make a siphon starter first. That's what these are. So a siphon starter is nothing more than this, this, and this. This is 3/4 inch PVC, two 90-degree PVC turns, angles, and then these cut to size. This is about 8 inches long, this is 3 or 4 inches long, and this is what's going to start your drain siphon when the time comes. So we'll set that aside. The actual drain siphon itself, pretty straightforward. I'm going to grab two of these guys, one of the 1/4 inches. What I like to do, or 1.5 inches, what I like to do is put the smaller pieces together first. So I'm going to put that, we'll set it aside. We'll do another one. Okay. Then we've got the 5.5 inch piece, put it on one side, the 7.5 inch piece, put it on the other side. This is going to be the piece that's going to drain the water out of the external loop and down into the drain system that you've got. So you want the T to be right here. This is going to be the cap. So you need two caps, one that's got a hole drilled in it. I usually, it's a little 1/16 inch hole here, inch hole or 1/8 inch hole is fine. Put that on there. The other 1/4 inch and a half goes into that T. This is your 90-degree that takes you down to the drain that's going to drain out. This goes over into the aquarium like this. This piece here goes down into the aquarium. This is going to go ahead and go to the piece that is going to drain. Here we have a piece of PVC 46 inches long. It's got holes drilled in it. This is what's going to allow the water to come in. You want the holes to be small enough so that no fry get into it. In this case, I've got 1/8 inch holes drilled, which is fine for most things. Oftentimes I'll use a 1/16 inch hole when I want a smaller hole. That just goes in here. The other cap that we have that's not drilled goes there. And this is a piece that's going to take you on down to drain out. And you want this piece to be longer than the bottom of here, so that when you're taking this out from whatever your drain line is, and you're using the siphon starter here to start the drain, this has to be long enough so that the siphon goes. So what we're going to do is this sits in the aquarium, water gets drawn in through here, water sits through here. As the water in the aquarium goes up, the water here goes up, goes out, and it drains. When it comes time to fill it, we'll put our finger over the top of the hole here to make sure to create a vacuum. The siphon starter would then be put on this guy here. You would go ahead, blow through, pulls the water through, and then drains. And now we'll go ahead and show how that works. See you in a minute. Okay, so here we are in our special lab just for testing these drain setups. Here's the drain setup we just built and the siphon starter. We've got here 2 5-gallon buckets. This guy's filled with water. That's going to be our aquarium. We're going to go ahead and we'll show you how this works. So this guy goes into the aquarium. I'm going to drop that on in here like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is start it. When we start it, it's going to bring the water level of this bucket down to where it equals with this. Now if you had this mounted on the side of your aquarium, you can then adjust exactly what water level you want in your tank based on how long you cut this piece. So if you want a low water level because you want to do lots of, very intense water changes, you can bring this on down and such. I use that a lot in my room. So anyway, we'll go ahead and we'll start it. So you just put the siphon on here. Gotta make sure to cover the hole with your finger. Take this off. Okay, now it's working. So it'll go ahead now and it'll drain that on down, so like I say, where it hits that spot, and then it'll stop. Okay, so it's been draining down. It's now got the level of the water. I don't know if you can see in the bucket here. The level in the bucket now is equal with this guy here. And so the cool thing about this drain siphon, which is always a trip, is that now when I add the littlest bit of water into my tank, it's going to drain right out. So for instance, put a little bit of water in. And the amount I just poured in will start to drain out. So if I'm adding water in to do a water change, then it is going to go ahead and drain the water out at the same time. So for instance, if you've got water coming into a tank on one end of the tank doing the water fill, then you have this drain on the other side of the tank. You can go ahead and run water into it for as long as you like, and it will go ahead and keep up with the water you have putting in. Now yes, you can have a fill in on a tank where you've got more going in than the drain can handle, but these 3/4 inch lines can handle a fair amount of flow coming out. I did find though, in a hope that it would cut down on any siphon breaking, when a tank would stop its siphon, that I use from 30 gallons and lower. I use 1/2 inch PVC for these drains, and then for 40 gallons and larger, I use a 3/4 inch for the drains. But the 3/4 inch have been fine, in all tanks, and I've just been slowly, gradually putting smaller drains onto my smaller tanks. But it's as much a space issue. I don't know that it makes any difference with, who loses their siphon and who doesn't, because they do lose their siphon pretty darn rarely. So anyway, that's how the drain siphon works. And you put them on your tank. Each one works individually. Like I say, they're pretty consistent. I have some drains that have never lost their siphon, and I usually only lose siphon on a drain maybe once or twice a month, tops of 120 tanks. And 9 times out of 10 of those, it's human error. I was working on the tank, I drained it down too far, lost the siphon, I filled it back up and didn't restart the siphon, something like that. But that happens very rarely. So it's been a pretty good dependable system, and the system you see in the fish room down there has been running just like it is now for about 15 years. So that shows you that it's pretty much proven the test of time. So anyway, we'll go ahead from here and go down to the fish room.
Then when you extrapolate it out to where you have, say, a row of tanks, each one has a drain set up and then a fill line going to it, and then you add a 2-inch air line that you have here. I don't have any more plugs and power strips around. Currently the power goes up into the plugs in the ceiling, so that keeps it a little less cluttered than it could be. But it still starts to look a little busy, but it's nothing more complex than just a fill line and a drain on each tank, going down to drains that then head back to the sink where the drain goes back into the city system. When you have multiple rows of tanks going, for instance, I have 2 rows of tanks here. This top row of tanks then drains into its own line that follows down to a main stem and goes down to the floor, that then heads off to the drains to the city.
The same goes for the second row down. They go down to another line and they drain out to the city. Sometimes I'll have them going on separate drain lines. Sometimes I'll have them going on the same drain line if there's a good amount of distance between the drain and the tank, which there is here. The whole point being that this is what you need to do so that water doesn't go from, say, the top tanks into the middle tanks. And then on the drain lines, since there's so many of them and they're so long, because the lines here then continue on back, and then the sink that we looked at a little while ago is about 20 feet further on down in that direction. So you don't want to build up any vacuums in any of your lines. So what I will do is occasionally, we'll find one here. Occasionally, I'll put a line in that comes out of the drain lines, and it's just open at the top. And I have it high enough so that it's above any other water lines, and then that lets air into the drain lines, and so there's no pulling or tugging or vacuums being created anywhere in the system. So the drain on each tank is built so that the water level is kept at a specific level for that tank. Now these two tanks, the drain system is on the outside of the tank, and you can see where I keep the water level at, and I have a piece of tape throughout the room on every tank, and that which shows where the water level should be kept. If I start seeing that water level creeping up, possibly because the drain setup is getting clogged or it's got debris that's collecting inside of it, then I know that before I have a problem, I'll just take the drain setup off, run some water through it, clean it out, and then put it back on and reprime it. But by putting the little piece of tape on all the tanks, and that goes ahead and tells me where everything should be, and gives me a bit of warning if there is a problem with the drain and it's going to go soon. Usually that's the way it goes. It just gets clogged up somehow. With all the beans that I feed and such, it happens occasionally. But this also tells you, if there's any problems with it. So that's helped me out a lot. And here's another example. You can see the water levels are all where they're supposed to be. And this one, for instance, has its drain in the back. And as a rule, when I add 10 or 15% per day, when a siphon does lose its siphon, and the water does fill up above that line, it will rarely overflow because I don't put more than that amount into the tank over the course of a day. And I, of course, check all the tanks every day, so when a siphon does stop and I see a tank that's filled up near the brim, then I know that the drain needs to be restarted or cleaned. Now this is the brains of this water change system, and yours doesn't need to be anywhere near this complex. It's only because I have 6 zones here, and I have them divided up into 2 sections. So I have 2 controllers. This guy on top controls all of the tanks in the alcove that's behind me, and this larger one, and that's 2 zones, and this larger one on the bottom is 4 zones, and it's the larger room. And then the lines come in from the room here and also down here, and so each line has a valve that is controlled by the controller, and it comes from the sink here. One thing that I learned and keep in mind is that when you have something like this set up, if you have a valve break, say one of these guys should break, which happens, you don't want to have water then flowing through the system through the broken valve, which ends up killing your fish because it's throwing all that chlorinated water into your tanks. So the way to get around that is to have these over here. These are like safety valves. They go on and off when the whole system goes on and off, and that some of the bigger controllers, the controller here, the 4-zone one, came with the outlets for that. So you want to ask about that when you set it up to make sure to have that in place. That way, if one of these valves should go, then the water is turned off if you have it on all the time. and won't then go ahead and run nonstop into your aquariums. The way I run this system 99.9% of the time is manually. I have it off generally, and when it's time to do a water change, I just go ahead and I hit the, turn the water on and do it from the controllers manually and let it run through its cycles. I do use it automatically when I'm out of town, and I've never had a problem with it, but I just would prefer to do it manually when that way the pressure isn't on throughout the PVC system when I'm not around, and less likely I would expect for things to wear out and for things to age and crack and that sort of thing. So the water is often turned off, and the system is then just turned on when I do the daily changes. But this is where everything comes in, and it's just a standard sprinkler system. That's all it is. I use these Orbits controllers and valves available at any Lowe's or Home Depot. I've replaced them twice in 15 years. Of the valves, I've replaced I think 3 of them now since I first put the system into place. I'm probably going to replace the valves again, or the controllers again soon, and this time I'm probably going to look around and go through an irrigation supply house and get some better quality controllers. But for affordability, this is the way to go. I mean, these controllers are inexpensive. The valves are only 11, 12 bucks a piece, and you're able to get it going. And of course, like with any water change system, you can program it for doing any number of minutes of water into any size tank, as many times a day as you like, daily, every other day, however you want to do your water changes. So, having the access to one of these guys really helps a lot with being able to control your water quality across the room. And then when it's running, it's perfectly quiet, and the water drains out of the tank at the same rate that it comes into the tank. So a cycle goes, a whole water change goes, and you actually aren't even aware of it. I have found that to change about 15% in the tank, the zones are all set up so that all the 10s are in one zone, the 40s are on one zone, etc. As I mentioned, there were 6 zones here, and I found that 8 to 10 minutes at about this flow rate, with no more than about 20 tanks on a zone, will change about 10 to 15% of the water. So generally, each zone is on for about 8 to 10 minutes here. And now there's one last thing I should mention about this drain system. Let's say I've got this tank here and it's, sitting here, it's doing just fine, and I decide I want to drain it down, but I'd like not to use buckets and all of that. So all you need to do is go over here to the drain setup, put a piece of electrical tape over the hole, and then come on down here, pull this out, and then do a siphon start on it, and it'll drain the tank all the way down to wherever the bottom is down here. So that's a real quick and easy way to drain the tank down. Then of course, with the fill line going in, all you need to do is turn your water on, have the fill line open, and it'll fill the tank back up again. So it removes the needs for buckets entirely. Okay, the question today is from Michelle. And Michelle writes, I really love your fish. I'd like to order one of the swordtails, but I really like the Z tequila. I'd get them, but being so rare, I'd just kill them. Smiley face. So, the thing about these rare fish is that, yeah, they're rare in the wild, and some of them are extinct in the wild. Some of them are very rare in the hobby, simply because people in the U.S. aren't keeping them anymore. But I have a ton of them here, and I'm doing the best I can to breed as many as I can. And the only way to learn how to keep them so that they stay around, so that, say, if I were to disappear for whatever reason, that the fish won't disappear, is for people to try them and learn. And you kind of have to fail. I mean, you just really do. So, for instance, with the Zoogeneticus tequila, I'll show you them here. When I first got them, they lasted maybe a month and a half, 2 months for me, and I killed them all off. I really wanted to keep them, and at that time when I first obtained them, which was about the year 2000, 1999, they were extremely rare in the hobby, and I was determined to keep them going. But all the information that I currently have today posted at the website on how to keep all of these fish, including the tequila, was not available to me at that time. So I had to fail and to learn how to keep them. I bought another batch, and they didn't do much better. Another few months passes. I got another batch from somebody who sold me a bunch of fish. He just said, oh yeah, these will breed, these will be great. He sold me 3 full-size pairs, who I sat and stared at for close to over a year and a half without getting a single fry before I learned that that guy knew when he sold me those pairs that the tequilas generally don't breed after they reach full maturity. It's a weird thing, but they breed most readily when they first sex out. So when you buy fish from me, you get them just as they're sexing out, because that'll go ahead and give you spawns for the future. If you get really nice, big, robust 1.5-inch fish with great orange striping or yellow striping on their tails, that's going to last another year or 2 years before their lives are spent out. They'll live as long as 4 years. It's entirely possible to watch a group of adults for the last 2 years of their lives and not get a single spawn. So didn't accomplish anything from that. So then time passes, and I managed to get another batch. This batch I got from John Mangan back east, and he had been keeping them in his tanks for a long period of time. They hadn't been changed routinely, where you have a situation where somebody breeds them, sells the fry, that person raises them up, breeds them, sells the fry. And with John, his fish had been in his room for a number of years, so they were acclimated to one set of water parameters, just like the fish are here that you'll receive, and those did well for me. And so I felt awful about the fact that I killed off the first three batches that I had ordered, not to mention the money that it was spent. But I would like to think I've made up for that by the fact that I've distributed well over 500 of them out to the hobby over the last couple of years, and I try to keep them here, at least 100 to 200 of them on hand at any one time, because they are so rare. So when you order them from me, I'll do everything I can to help you, so that they'll last and that they'll do well, and that they will survive for you. But sometimes you kind of have to go through losses until you get your own technique dialed in. And the thing is too is that a lot of these rare species are not hard to keep. Some of them are pretty easy to keep. Now the tequilas, they're not hard to keep, but they're best kept by themselves because they're a very peaceful, very nice little fish, and other fish will pick on them. But a lot of the gudillas have to be kept below about 75 degrees or you run into trouble. That's one of the things with the tequilas. But there are other gudillas and really rare fish whose temperature requirements aren't as strict, and they're a lot easier to keep. An example would be the Amicus splendens. Great fish, actually very common in the hobby. Used to be far more common than it is, and then was found within the last 5 years to be possibly extinct in the wild. There are 2 small populations, I believe, that were discovered about 5 years ago in small bodies of water that are expected not to survive, but it's going to go possibly the route of fish that exist only in the hobby. Another fish that you can consider that I no longer have here, but still fairly common in the hobby, is Chapeleuctes pardalis. This fish is actually so rare that its entire wild population is confined to an abandoned swimming pool in Mexico at the end of a river stream. This is according to Robert Rush Miller in his book, The Fishes of Mexico. And fortunately, they do really well in captivity. They're fairly prolific, they're easy to keep, and you can pretty much find them fairly easily in the hobby, and they're extremely rare in the wild. And then, for instance, I also have a fish that I'm learning and figuring out, and fortunately I didn't manage to kill off my first couple batches of them, but it's a new fish for me. It's a fish that I'd had many years before, but this population is a new population for me. They're not seen in the hobby anymore. Soon I have quite a few of them. I haven't put them up at the website. I've never mentioned them before, but they are a all green blue head to toe population of the Actinobius toweri, and they have a green blue sheen on them. Really a pretty fish. Very easy to breed, very peaceful. But right now there's so much conflicting information on the web about this fish that I'm still trying to dial in exactly what its husbandry is. The problem you run into with when you try to find out how do you keep a fish, particularly these rarer fish, is of course they're not mentioned in any of the books because they either hadn't yet been discovered or their populations were so low they weren't kept in the hobby, and now they're in the hobby but we don't see references to them in our text, in our fish books. But a lot of the information you do receive is based on a specific population that that author had available to him at that time. So when you see information on a species and it says that the fish, for instance with the toweri, this is a warm water fish. Well, I don't know that it is, and I have found that with the population I have, they are not comfortable at 76, 77. They are much more comfortable at 70, 71, 72 degrees. And in fact, my reproduction has been really good. They've been producing like crazy at cooler temperatures. So there's also information that supposedly the species is nocturnal, and it's not. Or it may be nocturnal. I don't know. I don't want to say that it isn't. But various things like that you kind of have to figure out for yourself. And unlike when back in the 1990s when some of us obtained these fish when they were first brought over from their home countries, we had just figured this stuff out for ourselves. I tried to write as much of it down as I can and put it up at the website, and you can always contact me to say, hey, have you worked with this fish and what do you know about it, and how can you help me keep it better. So anyway, the whole point of all of this is that the keeping the rare fish, somebody has to do it, somebody has to learn how to do it, or they're going to disappear. And the only way to do that is to fail. And when you fail, you learn. And fortunately, at least for right now, there's myself and a few others that are breeding these and making them so that they're available, so that you can afford to lose a batch or two until you get everything dialed in. Then once you've got them, make sure to keep them and breed them and distribute them to the hobby and send them out to others. So thank you. I hope that answers that question. Thank you for checking out this video on the automatic water changing system. When I first did this, I gave a couple of talks and things on the system, and I had a handout that I had made up of all the instructions and everything we've covered in this video, and it's now posted at selectaquatics.com. Go to the column on the left, articles, handouts, and videos. Click on that. Scroll down the page to creating your own automatic water changing system, and it's right there. And you can go ahead and print it on off, so that most of the information that was covered in the video will be found there as well. Thank you very much for watching it, and check out for the next video. The next one is about a fish that's probably the most important fish in the fish room. It certainly had more than most fish conservation effort to bring it back. It's been considered extinct in the wild for about 40 years, although in fact it was found about 5 years ago to be in 2 isolated small bodies of water that were not predicted to do well for the future, but they're currently in their 5th reintroduction attempt. The previous 4 have failed, and that fish is the Zoogoneticus tequila. So, and also customer questions will be taken care of. So I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.